open after we're done and everything. You can like mute
Okay.
and stop the camera and stuff. But I know we're live now. I just don't know if we're actually live because LinkedIn does not give you an indication of when you're exactly live. Like when they say, "Oh, you're live," that's not really true.
Ah, that's
Sometimes
interesting.
we sometimes it kicks in after like 5 minutes. So that's why we're now making small talk because I'm not truly sure if we're live yet or not. And I'm like
So how do you,
watching the browser window.
oh, so you're gonna see it on your end when it finally like you're on
Yeah,
stage. I see.
yeah, basically.
Okay.
And
Sounds good.
so I'm just like watching for myself, and as soon as I hear an echo, I'm like, okay, we're truly live. And that's just LinkedIn Live these. Oh, we are live now. Wonderful. Wonderful. All right.
Oh, excellent. We're
Hello,
on.
everyone. We're live now. And I just want to welcome Brian Lin, who's been so gracious to uh, agree to come online today and chat with us about his recent LinkedIn post. Brian's an associate director at HelloFresh, and he's based in Canada, I believe. So you have about 20 years of experience. You started out in agency world before you decided to move into tech or move into in-house. And now you're at HelloFresh, and we see your commercials all the time on YouTube. So every time I see it, I think of you.
I
So
can't
it's
think of
actually
a
cool.
I can't take credit for that. That's our brilliant and tenacious marketing team.
Awesome. So how are you doing today, Brian?
I'm well. I'm excited to be here. Hey, thanks for having me. And hello, everybody out there in LinkedIn Live. Yeah, looking forward to the debate we're going to have today, aren't we? We're going to have a nice, cordial debate.
Yeah, I cannot believe you agreed to come on live to talk about this because you wrote a
Why?
really freaking spicy post about 2 weeks ago. And oh, it's been a month now. Holy shit. It's time flies. It's been a
Yeah, I mean,
while.
it's funny that I find it interesting that people think that is spicy. Like I mean, design maturity is not something that really, like, I mean, we can start it off. Like design maturity is not really a thing, right? Like it's, at least as far as it relates to the business. But I know you and I were talking about bringing up the post, so we can kind of just start from there, and then we'll see how this goes from there.
Yeah. So you wrote a while back that design maturity is a strange one, the terminology at
Mm,
least. And it's something that the design industry came up with once upon a time as a means to evaluate an org's
right.
ability to utilize and appreciate our talent and skill. Typical design industry. Can you
Yeah,
summarize it a little bit for the
yeah,
folks who haven't read it yet? And I'll link this into the chat as well so people can take a gander.
yeah. I mean, just kind of like a really one sentence quick history on maturity models. It was, as far as I understand, was developed actually as by the Department of Defense to measure their vendors and how capable they are in building software for defense. And that's really where that took off with the business world. And of course, it's been co-opted by a lot of different functions over the years. But design maturity is, in fact, for me, a very strange one because, and it's kind of encapsulated in that one sentence of me saying typical design industry, because designers, I think traditionally have always really kind of vied for that visibility and that relevance from business. And for me, this is like a cry, right? It's like saying like, hey, I need to look in, you need to look at us or design, we need to pay attention to design because it's so, so, so important. And it often is, but it is not the most important thing. And design maturity, the way it's being expressed by the design industry, by consultants and people who are basically selling things, selling their services, consultancies like NN Group and folks like that, I'll call them out on it. It focuses the narrative on ourselves. It's like this is what we need to do, and this is how the business should be perceiving us. And if they're not perceiving us this way, they're low design maturity. They're not utilizing us correctly. These are all the stages that exist. And if you're not doing these things, then you are low design maturity. You're not doing design correctly. You're not doing design justice. You are missing out.
I agree with you 100% that a lot of design maturity scales that were created by consultancies like NNG aren't super helpful because as a designer, as somebody who subscribes to the theories behind it, I don't see the scales as super useful. Like I see us being on say level 3 of 5. It's like, okay, great. We have room to grow and it's not amazing, but it's, we're at a place right now. And
Yeah.
there's no next step to it, right? There's no help that NNG is providing necessarily that is truly useful. Like they have a bunch of articles, I've read a lot of them, and can I apply those articles to help me increase the design maturity level at a company I'm working at? Not really, because they're very theory based. And if I were to show the articles to stakeholders, they oftentimes will probably not read it. But if they do read it, it's not really convincing to them. It's not anything that's going to change their mind, in my opinion. So I agree with you there, but I do think that companies don't fully appreciate design, and there is quite a bit of lost opportunity there. Because when you do design really well for virtually any product out there, there is some kind of return on investment that, in my opinion, is often underused or underrealized because I mean, look at how teams are constructed, right? You have 5 to 10 engineers, and you might be lucky to have one designer on the team. A lot of companies, the ratio might be way worse. And I just don't believe that you can make the most use of your design, your engineers at that kind of ratios. Like instead of hiring your 20th engineer, why not hire a designer or a researcher? Because that will help you create more value. I mean, I think that's hard to argue typically if you understand design at any level.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I think you're right in many ways. There is an underutilization of design resources and design adjacent resources like UXR, like content design, you know. But I think you and I were talking about this ahead of time, about this idea of real and perceived value. And I write a lot about that and how it actually ties back to business. The further you are from real value, which design is quite far away from, as at least relative to our product and engineering counterparts, the lower on the totem pole you are, so to speak, because we are disconnected enough from how business makes money or how they measure how they make money and that return on investment, that it's harder to justify greater investment the further away you are from that. So it's sort of the system is working as intended insofar as the incentives that exist at the top of the chain to generate profits for shareholders, generate profits for themselves, for the business, et cetera, are tied much more intrinsically to functions like product and engineering and marketing, analytics, et cetera. Design is sort of the outlier there.
I'm going to challenge you on that. I agree with you that design is often not very closely connected to revenue generating um, actions or events. But I would say if you're coming at it from an engineering, product management, and marketing perspective, that is the same challenge that they're facing as well.
They're
If
closer
you're an
to,
engineer, are they though?
but they are because they're creating something that gets delivered, right? That can be touched and felt by the moment something is released. It feels much closer, even though if you think about it from a like mentally, it's still just code. It's still something on a screen. It's still something that's abstracted, much like a mock or whatever. But
Yeah.
it's much closer to the customer, to the end user, than something that feels like, well, the heuristics on this or the design, the user flow that I created or the customer journey that I created, like all of that informs real value and the delivery that engineers and product folks end up providing to the business.
So would you say a
It's the
visual
pipeline.
designer would a visual designer be able to argue that they are closer to generating value than a strategic designer who
More
does not
readily,
do visual
yes.
design?
More readily,
So
yes. Like if you think about like in thinking about it from the distance, like if you just kind of mentally picture that distance where engineers, product, and folks are much closer to real value generation, then the next sort of, if we start to bleed into design, things like visual design, things like that are
okay,
much more easily appreciated because it feels more tangible, right? You can envision what a screen looks like. You can envision what a service blueprint looks like for, where the actors are here and the stage is here, and it's just like people don't think in those terms, right?
okay.
Especially stakeholders.
Are you talking about perception or reality right now?
It's both, right?
Okay,
Perception. It's okay. So design creates perceived value more than anything else. Design creates perceived value. We
but
are
that's marketing.
extreme. No, yes,
Marketing,
marketing is part of it, but
marketing.
marketing is part of it. But design, even product designers, any kind of designer, any kind of designer creates perceived value by taking something that's real and multiplying its value through the perception that it makes. That you're right, marketing is a type of design that does this. But so same with product design. Perceived value is inert. A really good example is Path. Way back in the day, for those of you old enough that remember the app Path, which was supposed to be the next coming of what social media interaction was going to be like the new Facebook back in the day. And it never took off because it was purely about a new design. There was no additional real value being generated by Path. Facebook was doing the exact same thing with a fancy new interface. Customers don't care. Customers didn't care enough for a new interface, a new set of paradigms to use. So Path never made it up. But then you look at Airbnb and you look at these other design-led companies that are creating not just perceived value, but amplifying that real value through the experience that they make, through the customer service, through the amount of value that a customer and the types of value that the end customer and the end user receives, then you get something that's really special, right?
So I have 2 points here I want to make. One is marketing has more perceived value than design does at many companies, right? There's
Correct.
often a larger marketing team than there is on
Correct.
the design. And to me, I would argue that marketing is even more on the perceived value side than actual value than design is, because design actually touches the product. We change the product. Marketing doesn't change the product in
Correct.
any way besides to tell people that this product is useful and valuable. Yet marketing has way more perceived value. But I also want to like talk a bit about what is design right now, because it almost sounds like you're focusing design on the visual aspect, like what you can see and feel on a superficial level. When I'm thinking about design at a much deeper level in terms of we're deciding what to build and how this thing functions, how this thing operates. So when we talk, and I hate pulling in Apple as an example, like everybody else does, but
Sure.
you can say that Apple's value is not just in this I mean, there's a big part of it in the perception, but it's also extraordinarily well engineered ever since the
Absolutely.
first handheld device came out, and that to me is design, even though
It is.
the UX design or the UX designer aspect, the
Yeah,
stuff that you and I could potentially work on, is a thin sliver of the entire spectrum of design that Apple is or their products are.
absolutely.
So
Yeah,
where do we constrain it just for our argument here, our debate here? Do we constrain it just to product design, like digital product design, so that we're talking about the same stuff?
sure. I mean, yeah, Apple is an interesting example, right? I mean, let's kind of pivot a little bit and I'll kind of use that Apple argument a little bit here because Apple had Steve Jobs at the helm. when they were reinventing themselves and becoming the new pinnacle, right? The starting point of where they are today. And I was talking to a few of my design friends the other day about this. The iPhone, which is heralded as the design success that it is, it's a designer's kind of success story, right? And I know we're talking about digital design, but I want to make this point because it's an interesting one. Back then, everything was just physical buttons. Blackberries were reigning supreme, right? iPhone was just coming up. What Steve Jobs' salesmanship, his storytelling, his ability to sell and convey value on a stage and to the world, coupled with the commercialization and Apple's ability to build things at scale, commercialization of the capacitive touch screen, which was new then, that is what made iPhone what it like, which made it its hallmark, that hallmark product. Design is absolutely a differentiator for Apple ever since Jobs was at the helm,
Yeah.
because he intentionally made that choice to build an organization that cultivated good design work, that allowed the time and the space for designers to do the kind of work that you're describing, that, quote
Yeah.
unquote, deep design work. He built something intentionally to do that. Most businesses globally are run antithetically to how good design needs to get done. So the incentives are not there for business people, right, to allow design the space to do that kind of deep work, because design is often not the differentiator. There are thousands of mom and pop big companies out there that are worth similar amounts of money to Apple that don't have quote unquote good design, right? That,
Okay.
like, we wouldn't put them on the level of saying like, oh, they have great design, a great experience, but they don't need it because they generate enough real value, right, through the
Okay.
through the through the things that they make and they build.
Let's talk about that because I don't think it's fair for me to bring in Apple. I think Apple, as an analogy, is such a cop out for designers. It's like, let's talk about the most valuable company in the world and how great design is for them and how we can apply their strategy to our company, right? It doesn't work. Not every company is Apple. So let's talk about these companies with awful design that are worth a shit ton of money. So Oracle, um, Workday,
SAP,
yeah,
Workday,
companies
yeah, sure,
that they have horrible digital design. And let's
sure,
constrain it a little bit. Let's talk about digital design. It's stuff that you and I work on: UX, product design, and the digital realm, website, internal tools, and mobile interfaces. And we can virtually all agree, unless you want to be made fun of and mocked, that these companies we just listed have pretty bad design. And that's not to say, though, that designers who work there are not skilled.
no,
I just
of
know
course not.
that you can take an Apple level or a Fang level designer, put them into SAP, and they're going to crank out the same kind of junk. That's my belief, at least. And not because they can't make better designs. It's like they will just run into a brick wall. That's my theory is they'll run into a brick wall and not get very far. So let's talk about those companies and let's talk about design maturity scales or design maturity at those companies, because I think those are the folks that most often talk about design maturity because they see the limitations that they face
Right.
constantly, and they start to put two and two together and they read stuff about design maturity. It's like, okay, that explains why I'm not allowed to do X, Y, and Z. I'm not reaching my potential. How does it work there? Do you still think that design maturity is kind of a farce?
Yeah, because it
Okay.
isn't, because it isn't about the way the narrative goes for design maturity is that you're measuring the maturity of the business in order to like allow for design to do their work, right? Like, and it, designers in organizations like of that size, Oracle, et cetera, like IBM, et cetera, like the culture is going to be very different team by team. So to say that there's going to be teams that are going to be doing much more, quote unquote, good design, and there are going to be a lot of teams that are doing quote unquote not so great design, right? Because the incentives for different functions and different teams within these larger organizations are going to be different. Things that are closer to maybe consumers may get a bit more love and maybe have a little bit more allowance or affordance for people to do good design versus someone who's doing internal facing tools where the priority is like, those aren't the people who are paying our bills. So we don't need to practice necessarily those same things. So it's going to vary by team, but culturally, of course, it always comes back to the folks at the top or the culture that's being cultivated at the organization level, the system, as you call it.
So, dumb question, but what is good design to you?
Good design is effectively solving someone's or a group of people's problems in a way that is not necessarily effortless or frictionless, but provides enough real value at the end of the day
Okay,
to that
but
person.
I love your definition, and I agree with it in many ways because I come at design. I come from, I guess I subscribe to the theory that design is more than just how things look and feel, but it needs to solve real problems for both the user and the business so that you're creating value for both sides.
Correct.
Otherwise, there's no balance, right? Like it just extracts value from one side. It's not sustainable.
Right. And the business needs to
So,
do it in a way that allows them to make money, right? That it
yeah,
costs less for me to create that value than someone is willing to pay me for it. And
yeah,
that's real
like
value. That's the definition of real value.
like Movie Pass, not a good solution. You're throwing money at something that does not sustain itself. Where you can watch like unlimited movies for $10 a month or something. Doesn't work.
Mhm.
So by this definition, wouldn't we could argue that Workday actually is wonderfully designed,
Sure. You could argue in
right?
terms of it for who? Who?
It's solving people's problems.
Whose
It's
problems?
the it's one of the so first of all the customer's problems, right? So
Who's the customer? But who's the
The
customer?
HR team,
Right. Right.
the HR team finds this to be the best solution possible within their options, right? Because it's basically a all-in-one system, which is what they want. They don't want to clobber together a bunch of startups. There are a lot of startups out there who want to replace Workday someday, and they offer a thin sliver of features. And in that thin sliver, the usability is very high. It looks beautiful. It works really well. But then you realize that you need a whole spectrum of features, not just a thin sliver. And then you end up having to clobber together a bunch of stuff, and nobody wants to do that, right? So Workday is solving somebody's problem really, really well. And as a user, let's say you're applying for a job, you can say Workday is a horrible experience. But
They're
that
not the
is the
ones paying.
best. Well, see, the thing is, that's the best horrible experience you can have.
I mean, that's I would argue platforms like Greenhouse are far more preferable, right? Hell, even sending a PDF into a Google Drive is probably better in many ways for a
But
applicant.
that's not a viable solution.
Right. And for who? Who is it not a viable solution for?
So the whole journey of me applying for a job is that I get to the interview process. The ATS consumes my information, applicant tracking system consumes my information, and they're able to track how I do over the interviews. And eventually, I get hired, and they can onboard me,
Hmm.
and then they can track my expenses, my benefits, and
Right.
and then offboard me when the time comes to fire me or lay me off. And Greenhouse doesn't do that. Workday does.
Hmm.
So therefore, Workday is the best hardware experience you can have.
For the well, best horrible experience, maybe not so much on the HR side, right? Because again, like you said, it solves their problems, and they're the ones, the organizations that they sign these massive contracts with are their end users. They are the customers, or not the end
I'm
users. They
not.
are their
I'm
customers, right?
the point I'm
So
not trying to
the
make. It's not. I'm not trying to make the point of customers versus users and how they have two different experiences. I'm saying you have to look at it as a holistic system, right? The product has to solve the system's problem in order
but
to be
that
considered a viable alternative.
right, and it has to solve it better. It has to
Yeah.
offer something that differentiates between what already exists, right? So if I'm going to create a new Workday, then that it has to do everything that Workday already does on top of something else. It doesn't necessarily mean the user experience has got to be better, but it has to offer additional things of value that solve things that I'm still experiencing pain for. And that pain needs to be painful enough to offset the migration that I need to perform as an organization from Workday, right? So there's all these other factors that are business oriented, business specific that need to be considered before I offboard off of a platform like Workday, because Workday does enough for me. It solves for the 80% of the HR experience, of the people management experience, that the business saves a bunch of money in having to retrain, rehire HR people, you know, integrate with additional platforms, third-party platforms. Like uh, businesses are going to look at the bottom line, right? The dollar figure at the end of the day of what Workday is able to do for them.
This design does design encapsulate that.
Can you explain what encapsulate means in this case?
So if you're a good designer, should you be
Right.
considering what we just talked about, right? Because we're not just talking about how Workday looks and feels. We're
Correct.
talking about it from kind of a strategic sense or
Yes.
kind of a holistic sense of, does this product create value? Is it going to do well on the market?
I mean, it does, right? And it does. It does it. Should it encapsulate the applicant's experience? I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that people, designers who work at Workday, are chomping at the bit to improve the applicant experience because of folks like
Yeah.
constantly making fun of them, right? Of course
I'm
they.
sorry.
I'm pretty. No, it's okay. You don't have to apologize. They deserve it. But but I think we can all agree that any designer worth their grain of salt are going to be like, look, this is fucking broken, and we should invest in it. We should do something about this. But then the business is like, no, because we don't need to. They aren't paying our bills. Things are still like applications are still flowing through despite people being upset about it. It's not on fire enough. It's not in the red zone enough for us to make a clear and conscientious decision to invest in that part of the experience.
So I love that we got here because I feel like this is tying back to what you're talking about earlier, which is design is not the most important thing.
Correct. Unless it
And
is.
this is a prime example, right? Because
Mhm.
you can create a fairly negative experience of the Workday job application process and still have the product be immensely successful. Workday stock is, I don't know where it is right now, but they're doing well. They're doing pretty damn well overall speaking.
Correct.
And there isn't another system that I believe really supplants them in
Correct.
terms of the overall holistic system
Yeah.
alternative.
Right.
So if you're a designer and you're a system level designer, then you could technically argue that it doesn't the applicant experience or journey, it doesn't really matter.
Not in Workday's clearly not in Workday's playbook, right? It's not that it doesn't matter. It's just so far down the priority list in their proverbial Kanban board that it's not worth picking up in any super meaningful way. They're going to continue to optimize against their paying customers, which is HR, which is people ops, right? So this is how capitalist business gets done, and that's the incentive for where design gets deployed typically in these businesses, because the org structure, the incentives um, are driven by profits and immediate shareholder value and all these other things that we know in capitalist structures like this.
All right. So if you're a system level designer and you
Mhm.
think and you're really focused on the return on investment, you're focused on the money aspect, which is kind of the I don't want to say the meta, but that's kind of the message that a lot of designers are putting out right now and a lot of people are talking about and listening to, which is if you want to be seen as an effective designer or user researcher, you need to consider the business and the money and the return on investment, blah, blah, blah. It's like if you don't think about these things, then you're not a super senior designer, right? That's kind of the message that I've been getting. Would you agree?
I think that you need to be considered. I will say one thing just to make sure I'm clear on this. I am a believer though that design effort, design, capital D design,
Yeah.
it's not something that needs or should be quantified. But I think when we do design, we need to understand the business constraints that we are operating. We need to understand the incentives that are there for the business that I'm designing for. And people people are going to need to make some choices, right? Based on those things against their own values, against their own financial situations, against all of the things that we have to live with, basically all the different variables and constraints, and then design according to that. To think to think that designers can come in and just be like, I am going to change all of this, either solo or through all the influence that I'm going to wield, and I'm going to try to rally all these folks together to do it, is really naive because it's much bigger than that.
So the first part you said was really interesting to me in that you're saying design shouldn't have to prove their value. Is that what you
I'm
mean? Like
saying
you
they
shouldn't.
shouldn't they shouldn't they shouldn't it shouldn't we shouldn't need to quantify the effort that design goes through. I don't think there's any measure because our success is the product success, or at least that's how it should be measured. Because anything else beyond that is fluff. There has been no, I mean,
Okay.
I can't personally, like in my 20 years, 20 plus years, I can't think of a, a time when I could clearly, if someone were to ask me, Brian, tell me how this change that you made in the design all the way up to delivery improved X, like attribute it specifically to design. I mean, to be like, you did this one thing and it completely changed metric Y, right? It's like, and I'm not talking about like changing a button color. I mean, like actual system oriented changes, things that like we're talking not about like visual changes. I'm talking about like
Yeah.
actual because design is just one piece of the puzzle. We're one voice of the user. That's what who we represent. But there are also other functions out there that also do that. We don't own the user experience. We are one piece of it, right? An important piece, but just one,
Okay. I agree with everything you've said here in that
right?
as a designer, I've never been able to conclusively say this work that I did led to this much on ROI or revenue, etc. I think that's very wishful thinking, and we've been in a
And
way
dangerous,
gaslighting. I think we've been
dangerous.
gaslighting ourselves in a way because we are encouraging designers to talk about that in case studies. Like, tell me about the outcomes, the
I,
return on investment, the value generated.
it's all
And if you don't
bullshit.
do that, well, if you
It's all
don't do
bullshit.
that, you're not a senior designer, right? Like
No,
senior designers do this work.
a, a senior designer. I want when I interview folks, a senior designer senior plus designer, we're talking about scope, we're talking about influence, we're talking about how you're able to move laterally across your level to be able to support the internal politics and the internal relationships between different functions. That's where design really shines, because we sit in this, for better or for worse. The worst part is being we are removed from real value, like the point I made at the beginning, but we are removed just enough from real value for us to do that kind of work of building these really strong relationships with other functions, hearing them out and also offering something in return. So I'm going to make just like a really quick sort of like thing, like a little comment about this, because it's really important for me to see that like a senior plus designer is able to build the type of relationships that will then allow them at their level to do the work that you are describing, to give room for actual like real discovery work, quote unquote real discovery work, like deeper dives into things with them as partners, design as partners, not as a service.
Josh Peter says, but yet we need this on our resumes.
No, you don't.
And we do. We
Need
do.
what? The business
We,
impact?
yeah. From a recruiting standpoint, a lot of hiring managers ask for this, both designers, product managers. It's seen as a strength signal. It's like you know how to talk business. You know what the business needs, and you
That is
are
important.
attaching design decisions to your there's logic and there are numbers and metrics behind your decisions. And ultimately all the metrics lead to revenue and profit, right? Like
Yeah, that's
that's
like the unspoken thing. Everything ties back up. Like plus percentages will always tie back to plus dollars at the end of the day. I I see what you're saying, but I'm what I'm talking about is like some of the things you mentioned, like ROI and those types of things. Those things are not what I mean when I mean like resume numbers, right? Like I'm talking about like other measures that you may already have in place, and whatever the company has in place is something that you can utilize that are close enough or adjacent enough to design, like and I normally don't like to use it, but I do still use it. But like NPS and CSAT and things like that are like adjacent. Those are CX measures, but they are adjacent enough that can be tied back to your work and applied to your resume bullet points, or how you've been able to do the things that I was just talking about with influencing, going wider as senior plus designer, working who are the people you worked with and how did you work with them to achieve a certain outcome. It's not that you own that percentage that you put, because it's a shared thing. Like I said, product success is design success, but you were part of that. And in the interview, I'm going to dig into that and talk to you about that, right? About your contribution to that uptick.
I think the challenge here I mean, going back to our original point, which
Sure.
is design is further away. And I
Mhm.
think product is just as far away, if not further,
Yeah,
from
but they
the
but they get but they have the dashboards and the analytics and all that stuff, right, at their disposal typically. So so you could be right. I'm not necessarily disagreeing. You could be absolutely be right. But in most orgs, optics matter, right? And the optics is that product is able to communicate and rally all the stakeholders. Same thing that designers do, but for a different reason, and that is to maintain a status quo, or at least maybe like tick things up a little bit. It's to keep product owners and product managers are there to keep the business running, and that's real value. That can be attributed to real value because they are the harbingers of that. They make design and UXR and other folks from our side of quote unquote our side of the business is meant to disrupt that status quo if we're doing our jobs, if we're afforded that space. We are meant in an
okay.
effort to help businesses continue to grow. It's all well intentioned, but it's risky, and businesses hate risk. Product managers mitigate risk as close to the ground as possible. Designers mitigate risk in the sky, much higher. So there's still a lot of room to fall. And most businesses who are not really profitable are going to be scared shitless about that.
Do you okay, everything you just said I love and I agree with in that when we talk about design, we're talking about oftentimes disrupting the status quo, especially when it comes to design maturity things, because you're talking about changing the process, changing how we do things. And that is risky, and people don't like that because things have been working, they've been growing, they're successful, right? It
Yes.
usually takes a lot of pain for the business to agree to do things a little bit differently. So let me ask this then. As a designer who's working in an environment that does not seem like it's super optimized and you want to change things, is there some kind of a framework that you subscribe to if it's not design maturity? Is there some other, because to me, I agree with you in that design maturity is kind of it's a flawed
It's a flaw.
concept in many ways,
Mhm.
but it's the best flawed concept we have. It's like the workday
It's the
of,
work day. I was just about to say, it's the
yeah,
work day.
it's so is there another thing that we should be looking at to help us better understand or make sense of our world and then have some kind of a north star and kind of align our collective ennui and frustration and goals so that we can move forward?
Yeah, it's a really, I mean, it's a loaded question. There's a lot that depending on your seniority and your level and the agency that you have in your org will, depend, that will determine kind of the answer. But if I were to
Let's talk about
say
senior
it,
ICs. Senior ICs, like
okay,
senior lead, staff level at the highest,
okay,
the average designer out there who's listening to this.
okay, sure. Yeah, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was saying before, and this has always worked for me in the past, and how I've also, in many ways, succeeded in climbing the corporate ladder and being seen as someone who can be relied upon and all that. And that is, you work with laterally across your level to the best of your ability by paying very close attention to what your partners are trying to achieve. This is going to sound like heresy to everyone on the call, but I actually pay more attention to my internal stakeholders and internal quote unquote users, people who are invested in their success, than I do sometimes the customer. Because if I enable the success of my internal teams by helping them out, kind of like the whole age old yes and situation, it not only sets me up to be able to have their support in the things that I want to do in quote unquote disrupting the status quo, but it also actually ends up benefiting the customer. Because surprise to everybody, this shouldn't be a surprise, but I hope it's not. Other functions care about the customer too, right? They do. I know, it's shocking. Look at your face. It's shocking. Customers, they care about their customers too. At least the folks that I work with here today, they care. They want to see the customer succeed too in achieving their. Everybody is aligned at the very fundamental level of what we can do, of what problems we can solve for the customer. So if I can help my cross-functional partners achieve their goals and success as well, which is literally what I do. That's the one line in my quote unquote playbook. It's not really a playbook. I actually don't have a real framework hang. It's just like I just pay a very close attention to what their incentives are in succeeding, and I try to support them. And then I cherry pick and fold it back into mine. And I will create things all the time to be able to and demonstrate to them, play the long game. Good design takes a long time. Change takes a long time. The bigger the company, the longer it takes, right? We can all agree on that. So if you're able to at least build those relationships and continue to build those relationships and cultivate those relationships, there's going to be a lot more room and space for design. The team that I'm on, especially, will can attest to this. I'm sure some of them are on the call right now listening. They are afforded the space to be able to work and have the trust of these cross-functional partners to do more meaningful work, deeper work, stuff that may take longer, because they know that we have their back and they have ours. That's what you're cultivate. That's what designers are really good at. Product and engineering are essential, absolutely. Of course they are, mostly. They are. Um, but they're going to be way too busy trying to maintain, quote unquote, the status quo of the business benefactors, because the business scrutinizes those two functions a lot. They don't scrutinize design as much. So we actually have that freedom to do it if we so choose to. Yeah, I'm going to stop there. I've been talking a lot. You should talk.
No, no, this is great because it gets me thinking quite a bit. And there's a level where I'm like, yeah, I love this. I love that design is it's the partner and is helping other people make their dreams come true. And by doing that, we're also making our own dreams come true, right? Teamwork
Yeah,
makes the
yeah,
dream work, right? So, and I'm going to talk about this on a hypothetical level
sure.
because I do think that sometimes for designers, we're in environments where design is seen as kind of a subservient or like an assistant sort of thing, right? And as you do more of the things that people are asking you to do, you just kind of fit into that mold even harder. And eventually people are just like, we love what you're doing. Please don't change. Like, we love that you've been cranking out all these beautiful UIs.
Yeah,
And whenever we ask for you to do something, you jump up and you do it. And we love that. That's what we want more of.
yeah,
And if you continue doing that, people start to assume that is all you can do. Like, why change things? And I've just heard so many stories from other designers who are in environments where to get promoted, you have to be more strategic. You have to work across multiple teams and functions and product and feature lines, right? You have to show that you're a staff level designer who can impact the business at a much higher level from a strategic or bird's eye view. But nobody wants them to do that necessarily.
sure. Yeah,
So how does that work? Like, how do we? Obviously, it sounds like you've helped create, or HelloFresh was an environment where designers can really grow into those kind of spaces or heights.
yes,
But there are many areas where it's not possible,
right.
and
And
you can
that's
spend years doing it.
and that goes back to business readiness, right? In the post that you put up at the beginning, I end that post with, it's not about design maturity, at least design and maturity insofar as the business's measure of design maturity. It's the willingness of that, or the readiness of that business to allow design to do the work that we want to do. Because I mean, they're the ones who are paying our paychecks and doing all, like, I'm not saying we're subservient to that. It sounds awful when I say it out loud, but the business has other priorities. Like typically businesses of that nature that you're describing have far more, literally like harder things to deal with, like making sure they are around next year, or that they're selling enough product to be able to pay everyone's paychecks, or making sure that the marketing budget is, topped up enough where they can maintain a certain level of growth to the VCs that funded them. Like there's all these other variables. It's not like, I don't think anyone is out there saying like fuck design, like they are not useful and they're just, I hope not, like they're just mock monkeys. They're going to create the pretty things for us. I'm okay. I'm sure there are people who think that way and they are wrong, but they are also at that point in their business's life cycle, their stage, where they're not ready to. There's no reason to invest in something beyond that. To kind of go back to your earlier point about like being, people are happy with just designers pumping out mocks and all that. Sure,
Yeah.
there's a there's I know the cop out answer would be like, well, designers need to also know how to say no and kind of push back and blah blah blah. That's the cop out answer. Um, and I would say instead of saying no, you start saying, what about this? Right? It's in my career, this from my own lived experience as a designer, I have not encountered very many, I can't think of very many situations where when I did what about this instead has led to an unproductive conversation or has led to someone reprimanding me, unless I'm on like a super tight deadline, right?
Right.
Like, which can be the case, and that's fine, but it shouldn't be the rule. It should be more of an exception, ideally. So I would say it's more like, what about this? So I hear what you're saying, and I asked a bunch of questions, and then I came back with you with something that I think would be better and still deliverable within the time frame that we've allotted for this. But I think it's better. I think it's an improvement, and this is why I think it's an improvement. And so you start that conversation. Some of the folks on the call who know me will laugh at me later about this, but I like to coin the term. I design for conversations. I don't design for deliverables. Okay, I design to have a conversation with the recipient or the group. So I create things where we can talk about things, and that can be really early, that can be really late, it doesn't matter, but ideally early. I will create things sometimes based on something I hear, based on something. I don't wait for things to to be given to me. Sometimes I hear something from a stakeholder, I'm like, that's interesting. That's also connected to this other thing that I heard from this other product owner. What if I just kind of whipped up something in 15 minutes because design has the ability to do that? Identified how this could actually plug into the system that we already have, because you should have that technical know-how in your domain of expertise as a senior IC. And then you bring those two people together and you're like, hey, I heard about this, or we know that this is coming down the pipe. I thought this was interesting. And then you start the conversation. And then now design is in the driver's seat. And I guarantee you, like, I've never had a PO or a stakeholder or someone, an engineer, come back to me and like, why did you do that? That's like, why would you do that? No one has ever, it's always come back positive. They're like, that's super interesting, but we can't do that one thing that you did that you on your prototype or whatever, or on the design that you made or the blueprint that you made. But we can maybe try out this other thing. And then that helps influence plans. That helps influence Confluence docs. That helps influence yearly plan in the grand scheme of things as you move up the ladder. And that's been my experience in my career. Over to you.
People are saying in the comments that they would either like to be you or work for you. So
I mean,
it
hey, if I'm
sounds
hiring, look, everything goes back up to leadership, right? We can all agree on that, the system and the leaders that support the system.
sure.
But to an earlier comment I made, the culture of a business, when a business mandates like, oh, this is how things are done, uh, design, creating mocks and all that, there's no reason why, if you're a good manager, if you're a good leader, you create your own bubble of culture. You take care of your own house. You take care of your own lawn. The team that I manage and that I have the privilege to support, they've they've taken it and run with it. Like they're basically like doing the same things that I'm doing at their levels. They're influencing conversations, but because I create that safe space for them to do it. And some more leaders, if there's leads on the call and folks like that, like don't be afraid of doing that, right? Like I have a very supportive manager as well who does that. And I know this is a very privileged thing to say, to be in a company and on a team that has this type of culture, but this is the type of culture you need to create from the bottom up, not wait for the company to change. You need to create it yourself, and then through a collective effort within your own team, demonstrate the value of doing that. and it'll slow. I guarantee it. It's already happening, right? Like the influence trickles sideways.
So there was an article about 5 months back by Sarah Wachter.
Uh,
I don't know how to pronounce her last name because I keep
mm,
referencing it, and the article is entitled "Designers They're Gaslighting You."
yeah,
And that article was so widely shared and widely read that, I mean, first of all, it's a really well written article,
absolutely. She's
and
great.
there are parts of it where I'm just like, yeah, that definitely speaks to my inner soul. I've definitely felt those moments. Like, why am I doing this? I'm putting in an impossible situation. And I've read a bunch of LinkedIn comments about, getting buy-in or are bumping up design maturity. And most of the solutions people are recommending requires just a shit ton more work. It's like we did twice as much work for 3 quarters. And that's how we were able to convince stakeholders or senior management to do things a little bit differently. It's like we're going to do exactly what they ask us to do, but then we're also going to do the things we wanted to do in the way we wanted to do it. And it's not sustainable, right? Like that's just,
Nope.
I want to say that's abusive almost. You're basically willingly letting
Right.
people abuse you and like leverage and extract more value out of you. And where do you draw the line though? Like first of all, I want to hear your thoughts on the article because I know you had some interesting thoughts as well.
Yeah, I actually I love that article. It's actually a really great one. I fully support it actually. And in some ways a lot of her points speak to the kinds of things I'm talking about. I don't believe design should be demonstrated like the whole they shouldn't need to quantify themselves. Like again, design success is other function success too, because we plug into and feed into and inform the success of others
Sure.
internally. But this whole idea of evangelization and going on, I think she calls it road shows and taking design, yeah, across company wide on this road, like being like, look how great, look at all the stuff we can do and how we do it. That it absolutely doesn't work. Of course it doesn't. It's not, it doesn't, it starts and stops at those presentations. It doesn't go up and change. You're not, the people, designers delude themselves thinking that by doing these roadshows, by showing what I can do on a PowerPoint presentation, um, they suddenly the culture is going to change. Like suddenly they expect people to kind of stand up, standing ovation or something. I don't know, and be like, "Yay, you're absolutely right, designers! Like we have been undervaluing you the whole time." And it's like it doesn't work like that. It's not a there's no magic pill. Design is not a magic pill that can just make things pretty or better. Just it shouldn't be viewed that way. But in order for that view to change, gonna take time. It's not going to be this thing where you can just snap your fingers, put on a presentation, go in front of an all hands, get a standing ovation, and expect the next day to be different. It's small incremental changes that you make intentionally with the people that identify who the allies are, start adding value to those conversations, demonstrate that value through the work and the craft that you create that you're doing, whether it's service design, systems design, UI design, visual, whatever it is, whatever your capabilities are, help others help, and then they'll help you in return. Like it's this whole sort of like supporting mechanism. That's you're adding real tangible things to conversations.
So it sounds like your approach is to, first of all, we're over time right now. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah, I got
Or
time.
do you have a hard time?
No, I
So
don't.
you're suggesting that, so a lot of designers, when we talk about evangelizing designs, like you're right, roadshows is like brown bag lunches, presentations, trying to
That's
show
right.
people the value of design. And it doesn't work, right? Because you're kind of forcing people to watch a commercial, basically. And the approach you're suggesting is to really listen and then be very targeted when you hear what other people are asking for and dig deeper, try to align your needs with other people's needs so that you can get both done. You're kind of like you're like Congress, or if you're in the U.S., you're like Congress. You're packing all the bills together, and there's
Yeah, but they
some
don't
stuff
get
that you don't
anything
really
done.
agree with.
They don't get anything done.
But when they do get something done, it's
Uh,
like this massive bill, and there's some like objectionable stuff inside, and there's also some stuff that you want, and it's how you compromise. So is that
okay,
your approach?
sure. Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good. It's not a bad. Yeah, it's not a bad metaphor. Um, it is. It's understanding, really understanding, and not just like playing lip service. Really understanding your internal partners, what they're trying to do, so that they in turn can will feel compelled to do the same for you. I don't think if you ask a product person or an engineer, and certainly none of my counterparts, they will be like design is lesser. Like they none of them hold that view whatsoever. We are partners. We treat and act each other, act accordingly, like we are true partners. We support one another. We all have something valuable to contribute to the conversation, right? So making sure that your voice is heard by adding value to those conversations so that you can also be part of, you know, certain meetings, ask, and if you're not part of meetings where product and engineering, you can certainly like, again, I've asked my way into plenty of meetings to be present. And so I can also be a voice in the room in representing my team in design, right? It's again carving out space for design to do their work more than anything else, but it's done through understanding, not through aggression, not through apathy.
Do you have any suggestions or words of advice for designers who are in environments where their product partners will not outright say that design is lesser, but their actions very much indicate that they don't really believe design is on the same level as product,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good
because
question.
they see design as very much as a UI factory, right? Like I have ideas, so when I feed you the ideas, you make the designs and just keep it at that. I don't want things to really change.
Yeah, I mean that's a power dynamic thing, right? Because they would have to give
Yeah,
up that power
yeah,
and share it with you. And some people are very against that, right? They don't
yeah,
want to give up that
sure,
power. And I think, it can either go one way or the other, right? I mean, I've always been one for conversations, as you can tell. I've always sat down with people and tried to understand their point of view and where they're coming from and why that power matters so much to them when I could actually help support them and take some of that load off of them, to take some of that stress off of them.
hmm,
And if there's still this sort of like, no, I, this is like my job or whatever excuse they're going to come up with to avoid giving up that power, then it's not something that you're going to be able to fix on your own. I mean, if and again, if the company supports this kind of behavior, then that's going to be even more challenging. But I would say
right,
typically it's the individual and not the company. The company is going to want things to flow as seamlessly as possible. They don't want friction to happen between employees, certainly not within job families and job functions, right? So being able to bubble it up, have your manager talk with their manager, work it out. It happens. Sometimes it's not rectifiable. Sometimes
yeah,
we're just going to have to agree and disagree. When things like that happen in a lot of larger companies, you shift teams. It's not a good fit, right? That team is not going to be something that is, yeah, it's that person hopefully will not last that long, but who's to say, right? You can't change if the individual is not willing to meet you halfway, then it's going to be um, something that needs to be dealt with more externally, either through your manager or theirs. And if that doesn't work, well, you know, you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, and you know what you need to do.
I appreciate that. One thing that I really enjoy reading on LinkedIn is your content because you tend to be very straightforward and very out there. You have, I would say, contrarian opinions about things.
I,
And
uh, I just don't believe in nothing, the way, and this is not specific just to the design industry. This is like product engineering, like
yeah,
the way content, books, whatever, the way typically their things are framed, concepts and all that, it's so neat. It's so neat and tidy. And I get it, it's for education. Of course, you need to be able to see the steps and the layers involved in it. Design, especially though, is never that neat. So this is why I'm not a big subscriber to frameworks and things of that virtue, because when you, it's fine to understand those concepts, but I think where a lot of people trip over themselves is they try to apply it as is to whatever
yeah,
situation they're in. And it's like, it's not like that. So a lot of the things I say may seem contrarian, but they're also derived from a lot of the things that I have read or experienced, just kind of remixed through my own lens. And it's like, it works for me. It may not work for you, of course. We're all different people. We're all in different environments, but hopefully it helps someone. And that's why I write. I'm not looking to build an audience. I just, if it helps someone, then I'm going to be happy about that post.
I feel like you should have. I mean, you have quite a few followers already, but you definitely deserve more. You're definitely one of the
Oh,
more realist voices out there when it comes to design. So, folks, if you aren't following Brian Lin already, please give him a follow. He writes some really good stuff. I'm always reading it. I always enjoy it, even if I don't fully agree. But I feel like as we dig deeper, I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's that's true. I'm not gonna argue with that. Any is there anything on LinkedIn that really annoys you? Because sometimes you talk about content creators. I'm like, damn, is he talking about me?
I don't know, Hang. If you feel like I'm talking to you, then it's probably applicable, right?
I'm the main character.
Yes, this is the thing, the main character
Yeah.
syndrome of designers. But that's a call for another day.
Yeah. Well, any last words or any questions, Brian, before we hop off?
No, I appreciate everyone who stuck around. I know we're over, and just everyone who listened to our conversation. I hope it was again helpful for anyone listening there. And if if it has been, I'm glad we did this.
Cool. There's a lot of interest. We still have 260 people listening, even though
Well,
we're overtime, and it was over 320 or I can't remember, over 300 something during peak. So there's a lot of interest here, and I hope we have more conversations about this
yeah,
in the future.
same here, Hank. I'm always happy to have a discussion. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Likewise. Thanks everyone for listening and tuning in. It's almost, oh God, it's Friday. I didn't realize it. Happy Friday, everyone.
Happy
Let's
Friday.
get out there and enjoy the sun. So have a great weekend. Take care.
Bye, everyone.